Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, friends, for joining. Inshallah, we will continue from our yesterday's subject. And today we will start with one of the references which we had talked about yesterday, but I said I will come back to it and we will learn from it how Allah gives example. And when we say, what does Allah mean by this example? So that is our subject of the day, and see if we understand what does Allah means by this example. And this will come from 4 ayat of Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah number 2, ayat 17 to 20. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The story of 2 men, and they both are on a journey through the jungle. One with a flashlight with a lithium battery inside. Very bright, very powerful flashlight. And the other, he has a matchbox full of sticks. And they both enter a jungle and begin their journey through the jungle. As they come into the jungle, as they leave the open area behind them, due to the deep, tall trees, it starts to get dark inside the jungle. And after a while, it gets so dark that both of them realize they need light to see further, so they don't bump into the bushes or they don't tangle themselves into the bushes and bump into the trees. So the man with the flashlight instantly turns on his flashlight. Now he can clearly see where he's going, and he keeps moving forward. The man with the matchbox takes out a stick, put a fire, collects some small pieces of wood, and put a fire to it. In the fire, he could clearly see in front of him, on the side of him, on both sides of him. Matter of fact, he can see even behind him. Now, with the clear view, he also starts to move forward into the jungle. But after walking 10, 20, 30 steps, he realizes the light that he has is not as bright as he needed to move further than 20, 30, 40 feet. And pretty soon, he finds himself tangled with the bushes and bumps into the tree. Since he does not want to injure himself, he takes another stick out of the matches box, lights it, collects some more pieces of wood, put a fire to it. Now he can see things in front of him, on the side of him, in the back, behind him, and all that. And he again starts to walk safely forward. Again, within 20, 30, 40 feet or 40 steps, he realized that there is not enough light. Again and again, he bumps into the trees and he injured himself again and again. he finds himself tangled in the bushes. He's falling on the ground again and again due to the darkness. While there was a light, he thought he had seen enough way to make him safely take the steps and walk through the jungle. He thought he had enough memorized the route that he can safely take in between the trees, and he can maneuver himself safely into the jungle. But soon after, he realized, after 20, 30 steps, that no, without the light, he cannot continue on the journey. And he does this again and again. And finally, he realized there is no more sticks left in the matchbox. Now he's in utter darkness. But once in a while, he will notice in the heaven there is lightning. So he will stand still, wait for the lightning to strike, and he could see when the lightning will strike just enough for him to move a couple of feet. He could take a couple of more steps, but there was a problem with the lightning. The lightning was blinding him, because all of a sudden the lightning would come. He could see a couple of steps, but also at the same time, he was blinded by the lightning. And eventually, he gets lost, and he never makes it out of the jungle. Whereas the first gentleman with the flashlight, bright with the lithium battery, easily walked through the jungle without falling, without bumping into trees, without tangling himself into the bushes, without getting injured. He safely makes it to the other side. So now we are asking, what does Allah mean, Allah intend by this example? If I would ask, and I'm not asking anyone to unmute, but if I were to ask you, what do you understand by this example? Remember, our subject is that Allah guides by examples. So what does Allah meant by this example in the Quran? And this ayat right next to it, in ayat 66, it says, so we made it an example to their own time and to their future generations, and a lesson to those, only to those who adopt taqwa, who fear Allah. And the example of those who disbelieve is like that of one, and this is our answer to the question I just asked. So first, example is for them and their future generation. Meaning this example is for all the time. And here is the answer. The example of those who disbelieve is like that of one who shouts at what hears nothing but calls and cries, are like of those who are deaf. When Allah is calling on them, they are not listening. Dumb. They know the truth, but do not speak. And blind. They have eyes, but they do not see, as their heart are closed and locked, so they do not understand. And this is the example. So ask yourself, what does Allah meant by this example? Does this example apply to me? How do I understand this example? How do I understand this example? So here, let's move forward. And during the question and answer, if we need to discuss more of this example, because this was the gist of yesterday's lesson. So in today's lesson, the example in Quran of those who do good deed and those who does good deed with a good intention versus bad intention. Amazingly, Quran is full of examples. Allah gives example of those who does good deeds with a good intention. And also Allah gives example of those who does good deeds with a bad intention. Is that even possible to do good deeds with a bad intention? Yeah, it's very much possible. Matter of fact, it is seen all over the world. The people are doing a lot of good deeds with very bad intentions. In one place, Allah says, those who does good deeds with a bad intention, or those who do good deeds without understanding the good deeds that they are doing. Their example is that on the day of a dust, and how the dust scattered and blown into the wind. Whereas those who do the good deed with a good intention is like a solid rock, strong tree, which does not move, and like a mountain, firm, unmovable. So here are two ayahs for that. The example of those who spend their wealth in the way of Allah is like a seed which grows 7 spikes. In each spike is 100 grains, and Allah multiplies His reward for whom He wills, and Allah is all-encompassing and all-knowing. So that's one example of those who I have a good deed with a good intention. Even in this, Allah is using example for those who are paying attention. Now let's look at the same surah, just 3 ayahs further down. O believers, do not waste your charity with reminders of your generosity or hurtful words like those who donate their wealth just to show off and do not believe in Allah or the last day. I have only read half of this ayat. Remember, Allah is talking about and referring to and addressing the believers. And those believers who are giving some charity, doing some good deeds. But what is the intention behind it? To drum up his own chest. I'm doing a lot of good deeds. I'm giving charity. I'm doing you a favor. If the purpose, the intent behind it was to show off. And actually, they do not believe in Allah or the day of Qiyamah. They forget that there is the day of reckoning and I will be present in the front of Allah on that day. And therefore, when they give, the intentions are not pure. Intentions are not pure. And Allah is all-encompassing and He knows everything. He knows what you are doing. What is the purpose of that? Their example is that of a hard, barren rock covered with a thin layer of soil, hit by strong rain, leaving it just a bare stone. There would be no benefit to him. Such people are unable to preserve the reward of their charity. It will be just like a dust blown in the air. They will not be able to preserve it. Allah does not guide such disbelieving people. So those were the two examples of the good deed with a good intention, good deed with not so good intention. Again, the talim is not about the donation or about the charity. The talim is Allah gives examples. And He teaches us by example. And that is His habit of teaching and guiding. That is the lesson. So let's come into our lesson, chapter number 17 for the day. And see, Allah continues to use examples. And let's see if we understand this example now. Before I read this ayat, only line and a half, let me remind you, Adam, he was created by the dust, by the hand of Allah, and Allah blown His nur, His soul into him, and he became alive. There is no mention of father or mother in his creation. Whereas Hazrat Isa, without father, was born by one, the Maryam, the mother. Totally different situation, different time, different way of birth. Here, in the second example of Isa, the story goes, one day when she excluded herself from the people and she was in a shower, an angel appeared in front of her and said, Allah wished to give you a son. As you have purified yourself, I will blow His soul into you and you will have His son. And she said, how could I have a son? No men have ever touched me. I'm pure. I'm not that kind of woman. And he says, Allah does what He wills and wish. And that is the amr of Allah. So be it. So be it. And sure enough, she became pregnant and gave a birth to Hazrat Isa without a father. But look at the example Allah is giving in Qur'an. Surah 3, Surah Al-Imran, ayat number 59. Indeed, the example of Jesus in the sight of Allah is like that of Adam, teaching by example. So what do we understand by this example? He created him from the dust and then said to him, be, kun, and he was. Allah said, in my sight, the birth of Isa and birth of Adam is exactly same. By my amr, and they were both created by the dust, and they both became alive when I said kun, be, and it was. Example after example. Matter of fact, if I would have to say that entire Quran, even those ayahs which are simple, even in those simple, clear ayat, there is a lot of example for us to learn from. Let me give you an example of that. Irony. I have to give you an example of that. Allah says, be good. Very clear direction. Need no interpretation. But the question is, what is good to you and what is good to Allah? How do we know what is the criteria and definition of do good? Do we do good with a good intention? Do we do good which is temporary, or do we do good which is permanent? Is there a khidmat of one time or khidmat jariyah, permanent? Allah does not say that. So how do we know what is good? Then He gives examples so we understand what is good. Allah says, pray. Very clear direction, no required interpretation. But then question comes, when do I pray? Whom do I pray to? How I pray? What is the boundaries, ihata, that Allah have set for these prayers? Needs examples. And the example of that would be that not only Allah says to pray, but then He sent Rasul to show us how, when, and where to pray. And then Rasul teaches by example. He shows us how to pray, when to pray, where to pray, by his own action and examples. So you see, even in the clear ayat, there are examples. Need examples. Imam lives by his example. He guides by his example. It's not required or necessary he use the word misal, example, because he is the misle Allah. He is the example of Allah. His action, his way of doing things are the example for the mu'mineen. He lives by example and he is the example for us. Now, examples in the Quran of those who accept his signs and those who rejects. First, the word signs, ayat, of many kinds. Allah's signs are of many kinds. Ayat, which are written form, the verses are called ayat. Ayat are the signs, so we may see things. Ayat or the signs are also his miracles. Ayat and signs are also his habits. So those who accept his miracles, his signs, his ayat, his example, and then there are those who reject. So let's look at some of this ayat now. Are we paying attention and do we accept? Remember, it's not about others, it's about you and me, us. Do we see his ayat, his signs, his miracles, his habits of doing things? Do we accept his examples? Surah 6, ayat number 90. Those are the people whom Allah has guided. So it is their guidance that you should follow. So Allah says there are people who He has guided, and their examples and guidance you should follow. And say, I ask you, no reward for it. It is nothing but an advice for all the worlds. And who is saying this? And who's Allah asking to say? He's asking Rasul to say, Kullu, say, that I am giving you advice because I am guided by Allah, and for that I ask no return. I ask no reward. And I am here to advise, and I have advice for all the mankind of the world. Surah 7, we will read 2 ayahs, but 177 first and 176 second. There are some ayat in the Quran. When we will go to that, and if you understand the Quran, if you have the eyesight, you may read the Quran ayahs 176 and 177, and then you will say to yourself, wait a minute, I need to go back and read these ayahs again. Meaning conclusion is first, and the question and the pondering is second. So in our case, for learning, we will read 177, and then we will read 176. And this comes from Surah 7. Evil is the example of those who have rejected our signs. Again, example. So what is evil? Shar. Those who reject the signs, the ayat, the miracles, the examples of Allah. Allah is giving their example to us now. That is the evil, when you don't pay attention to His sign. Matter of fact, you pay attention and then you reject His signs. That is evil. You are cruel to yourself. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minaz zalimin. Beshak, you are Subhan. I am the one who's cruel to myself because I have rejected your signs, rejected your miracles, rejected your example, rejected your habits. I have rejected your Rasul and their way of life. So Allah says, evil is the example of those who have rejected our signs and have been doing wrong to themselves. They are zalimeen to themselves. In ayah 176, has more detailed answer to the above. If we had willed, we would have elevated him with our signs. But he gripped to his life, to his dunya, to his material being, following his evil desire. Do you understand the example above now? Because it was him that he rejected. Allah wanted to elevate him. He willed to elevate him. But he was the one who went after his material, his name, his seat, his money, his desire for desire, following his evil desires. His example is that of a dog. Look at this example. We will not like this example for ourselves. He said, those who does this is their example. is like a dog. If you chase it away, it pants. And if you leave it, it still pants. That's the example of a dog. He's keep wagging his tail. If you chase him away, he comes back. If you pet him, he still comes back and wag his tail. This is the example of the people who deny our signs. That's not a good example. And we never would like this example for ourselves. So narrate to them stories of the past, the example of the past. So perhaps they will reflect. Now you see why we should read 177 first and 176 after that. So we understand what Allah is saying to us, how He wants to guide us, what we are doing, which is cruel to ourselves, and what Allah will for us. Allah wills nothing but the best for us. He does want to elevate us. And therefore, He shows us His miracles, His signs. He shows us His examples. He shows His habits. He guides us by the ilm and the tawil of it, understanding of it. Surah 11, ayat 24. The example of two groups is that of a blind and deaf person on the one hand. And you will appreciate this example. Now Allah is dividing people, humankind. With your permission, He's dividing the believers, those who have given their bayah to Allah, to Rasul, and to the Imam. If you would permit me to say this. Because until we don't bring this to our own self, within our own people, there is a danger. We will always will think of the good for us and bad for others. That's not a good way of learning. Always apply every single sign, every single example to us, ourselves, and to our own people first. And what is another good thing about that? It will keep you humble. When you say, I am good and they are bad, we lose our humility, use our humbleness. Because we are saying, I'm good, you are bad. That's not a good way of learning. So if you permit me for a minute, if you tolerate me for a minute, let me use our own example. The example of the believers, the mu'mineen, the example of the two groups within that one jamaat is that of a blind and deaf person on one hand, and a seeing and hearing person on the other hand. Are they equal when compared? Would you still pay no heed, no attention to it? Those amongst us who believe in Allah's miracle, and the best of the Allah's miracle amongst us is the Imam Zaman. Nuran Allah, Nur after Nur after Nur, Imam after Imam after Imam. That is his biggest sign, biggest miracle, biggest example amongst us. Those who can hear and see this example, this miracle, this sign, can they be the same as those amongst us who do not see that, who do not see the Imam? Nur an Allah, Nur, never ever disappear. Always and always Al-Hayyul Qayyum, living and present, Zahir and Batin, Awal and Akhir. And those who have blinded themselves to this example, the example of those two groups within that one Jamaat, those who are blind and deaf and they do not see Imam as the miracle of Allah, the sign of Allah, the example of Allah, the Misle Allah amongst us. And those who do see, can they be the same? Can they be the equal in comparison? So would you not pay attention? Allah is asking you a question. Are they same? So why don't we pay attention? This is the end of our examples. Inshallah, today's subject was the conclusion of the understanding of this example. Keeping it short, Allah is guiding us through the example. Allah is teaching us through the living miracle, living example in the form of the Imam Mubin. How do we see him and how do we follow his example? That is entirely up to us. How do we see it? How do we believe it? With that, I will stop here.